Hello Booktube, my name is Elizabeth and I read bookends and books. I was a judge for the Booktube prize for the Nonfiction division. For the quarterfinals I was attributed Group D, and this is the video in which I tell you how I ranked the 6 books I had to read. Now if you found this video, you know what the Booktube prize is, so I will not try to explain it to you. What you do not know is who I am, because this is my very first Booktube video. At least the first one that I will post. So a few words about myself. My name is Elizabeth, as I said, and as you can probably hear, my first language is not English. I'm French Canadian. I grew up in the region of Montreal in the province of Quebec, and now I live in the region of Ottawa in the province of Ontario. As far as reading is concerned, I would say that I read about 50% fiction, 50% nonfiction, and same goes for languages. I read about 50% in English and 50% in French, hence the name of my channel. I should also say that I do not work in the book industry. I did not study literature at university. I am not a literature or language teacher. I'm just a reader, an amateur in the true sense of the word. Now for my ranking. I will start with the one that I put first because I think my comments for the one that I put last could turn out to be a rant. So let's stay tuned and see how that goes. So in the first position, I put Eat the Buddha. I'm trying to avoid reflection here. I don't think it will be possible. Eat the Buddha, Life and Death in a Tibetan Town by Barbara Demick. This is an oral history of the city of Naba, N-G-A-B-A, in the city of Tibet. The reason why I put it at number 1 is that for me, this represents, in this group, what is the ideal nonfiction. That is nonfiction based on research. For me, that's the basis of nonfiction. It's research and then presenting the result of that research to a wider public. And this is what Barbara Demick does. She interviewed dozens and dozens of people. She consulted tons of documents, whether they be reports or newspaper articles. And at the end of the book, there are tons of footnotes or end of book notes and references and bibliography. And it shows that she worked a lot to get the information that she has. And with all of that, she painted a very interesting tapestry of the city of Naba from the 1950s to today. Another reason, perhaps because that I put it in first, is perhaps that I relate to it in the sense that I come from a linguistic minority, French Canadians, who had, maybe not to the same level as the Tibetans, but who still had to struggle to keep their language and their culture alive. And that is the case of Tibetans. Since the 1950s, they had to fight for every ounce of freedom, for every possibility of speaking their language and learning how to write their own language and schools in their language. And they had to fight to keep their culture alive, to keep their way of life alive. And it's a compelling story to me. And also, it's a region about which I do not know much. And after reading this book, I felt like reading many more books about Tibet and China and Asia in general. So I think that's a quality of a nonfiction book too, when it makes you want to read more about the same subject. So for all these reasons, I put it at number 1. The book did not make it through to the next round, and I have to say that I'm quite surprised. I thought it was the sort of book that would make it through. So I'll be very curious to hear other people's explanation why they did not put it in their top 3. At number 2, I put The End of Everything, Astrophysically Speaking by Katie Mack. Now in this book, the author, who is an astrophysicist, explores the various ways in which the universe could end. And by universe, I mean not just the planet and not just the solar system, but really truly the universe and all its billions of galaxies. It's a subject that I find extremely interesting. I think it's fascinating. Once again, it's based on research. This time it's not so much recent research, but it's more the result of all the years of experience of the author. She has tons of knowledge that I do not have. And she presents it to the reader in a way that is very relatable, very understandable. I love it in science books when I understand what I read. I should say that I'm not a scientist either. I'm not a physicist, so most of the notions that she talks about are well beyond what I know of the world. But while I read it, I understand it. So that makes it very interesting. Also, she tells she presents her knowledge in a very light way, even though the subject could be a bit dark, the end of the universe. But it's presented in a very light way with a good sense of humor. Read the footnotes, they are funny, they add a lot to the story. So I put that one at number 2. This one I am less surprised that it did not make it through to the next round. In fact, I don't think any science or nature book made it to the next round. At number 3, I put Inferno, a memoir of motherhood and madness by Catherine Cho. As the title says, this is a memoir. In this book, the author tells of her experience with postpartum psychosis. That is not the only subject of the book. She basically talks about her entire life. In various flashbacks, she goes back to her childhood, to a previous relationship that was an abusive relationship, to how she met her husband. She talks about her relationship with her parents, her relationship with her cultural Korean heritage. She talks about all sort of things, and it's well written, it's well constructed too. As I said, she talks about all of that in various flashbacks, because if she had started with her childhood, I don't think I would have read the book until the end, because that in and of itself is not compelling enough. The whole thing, however, is very compelling. The reason why it's at number 3 and not at number 1, even though it's probably as compelling, if not more, than Eat the Buddha, is because it reads a little too much like a novel. I know it's a weird pet peeve to have, but I prefer nonfiction that assumes its nonfictionness, if I can invent that word. I don't really like nonfiction that tries too hard to read like fiction. And in this group, I had quite a few books like that. This is why it's at number 3, even though it's a very good book. It's very emotional. It made me cry. I will remember it for a long time, but it's at number 3. At number 4, I put Conditional Citizens by Laila Lalami. This is a collection of essays loosely based on the author's experience, in which she talks about how various factors such as race, gender, religion, place of birth, make certain citizens less equal than others in the United States. For example, if I was an American woman as a white person, I could easily complain about sexism or misogyny whenever I felt or encountered it. However, herself, as a person from Morocco, if she ever complains about sexism or misogyny, she will immediately be reminded that she is from Morocco and that the situation of women in Morocco is so much worse than in the United States that she really should be grateful for what she has. So basically that's her point, is that people from minorities are placed in a situation where they are expected to be forever grateful for the rights and privileges that white citizens simply feel entitled to and do not think twice about. She makes a very interesting point. However, I cannot say that it's something I've never heard before, so that's the reason why I put it at number 4. I should say that this book also made it through to the next round. In 5th place, I put Uncanny Valley by Anna Wiener. This is a memoir of the years the author spent working for various startup companies in San Francisco. It's interesting in the sense that this is a world that I do not know. I'm very grateful that I do not work for a startup company. I don't think I could work in that sort of environment. But at the same time, this book illustrates a little bit the limits of the memoir. I think the most interesting stories about startup companies is just outside of the scope of this book. For example, a subject that would be fascinating would be the mindset of these young CEOs. Most of these companies were run by 25-year-old men who barely ever had a job before that, and almost overnight they find themselves at the head of companies worth millions of dollars, and they have to manage people and budgets and expectations. A deep dive into these minds would be very, very interesting, but the author is not a CEO, so her memoir cannot be about that. Another subject that would be very interesting would be sexism in these startup companies. Once again, most of these companies were run by young men, but also employed at 90% young men in their 20s, and there was very little oversight, and apparently sexism was rampant in these companies. But the author herself did not experience any harassment or any anything of the sort. So she broaches on the subject, but she doesn't really talk about it because it's not her experience. That being said, I'm not putting the book at number 5 because of what it's not. I'm putting it at number 5 because of what it is. The author makes a few choices that I do not agree with. For example, she decides not to name a single company that she talks about. However, it is very obvious that she's talking about Facebook, that she's talking about Twitter, Amazon, and a bunch of other companies. But instead of naming them by names, she chooses to describe them with monikers like the social network everybody hates, the microblogging company, the online superstore. So it makes the companies very recognizable. So that makes me believe that it's not for legal reasons that the companies are not named. They are recognizable, so she could be sued for anything that she says against these companies anyway. So I think it's really a writer's choice to say, I will not mention them. But she does mention them. So it's a bit, I can't say that I understand that choice. Also, some of the statements that she makes should be, in my opinion, backed up by sources. It happens once in a while that there's a quote in quotation marks, but there's absolutely no source for it. She doesn't say if she took it in a newspaper, on the internet, on the radio, on television. We have no idea where it comes from. So as far as I'm concerned, it could be completely invented. So that's another reason why I put the book at number 5. And at number 5, that leaves us with The Dragons, the Giant, the Women by Wayétu. Now, the reason I put it at number 6 is not because it's the worst book of this group. This is about the author's escape from Liberia that was in the midst of a civil war when she was about 5 years old. She was with her father and her sisters while her mother was in the United States studying. Most of the book is told from the point of view of the author as a 5-year-old. The middle part of the book is told also from the author's point of view, but it's about her years in the United States as a teenager, as a young adult, as an adult. And one of the last parts is told from her mother's point of view. And I have a problem with that. I should say blankly, I do have a problem with that. At first, when I read it, I did not quite know what to do with it, what to think of it. So I decided to go on a website called LitHub. They have a section called Bookmarks where they compile reviews of books. It's some sort of Rotten Tomatoes for books. And I read most of the reviews, and none of them really talked about that, or I should say, none of them talked about it as being a problem. Most were praising the book for its creativity and for the creativity and for the originality and for the compelling fiction, the fact that it read like fiction. There's only one that said a little something about it. It was the review in Kirkus, where it said that purists may balk about that. And it's not so much that I balk, it's that it breaches one of the basic rules of the genre. For example, one of the basic rules of romance is that you cannot end the book in murder-suicide. One of the basic rules of historical fiction is that you cannot set it in the future. And one of the basic rules of memoirs is that it cannot be narrated from a fictional point of view. And this is what it is. When Wayétu decides to adopt her mother's point of view, she invents everything. She pretends that she is a witness to events that she did not witness. She pretends that she took part in conversations that she did not take part in. And more than that, it's not backed up by any sort of research or any sort of sources. I think it would have been more acceptable if she had said at the beginning of the book that she had spent countless hours interviewing her mother to know exactly what it was and to present the facts and to present the situation exactly like her mother lived it. But it's not written anywhere. It's only mentioned a little bit at the beginning of the book that the dialogues, and by the way, there are dialogues on every page or almost, that the dialogues were recreated from the best of her memory, the best that she could recall. Well, I don't know, but between you and me, I can barely rewrite a conversation I had this morning. How am I supposed to rewrite a conversation that happened between two adults when I was 5 years old? And how can I rewrite a conversation that happened between two people that none of them was me? It's a work of fiction. So that's the reason why I put it at number 6. It's not because it's a bad book, it's because it's very bad nonfiction. It's a work of fiction. I really don't know why actually I think I do know why the publisher decided to publish it as nonfiction. It's because if it had been called autofiction, it would have sold much fewer copies. So as a memoir, it does stand out because it's not a memoir, it's a work of autofiction. So for that reason, I put it at number 6. So that was my ranking for the Booktube prize. I will also be a judge for the next round. I was assigned Group A, where I will find my favorite book in there, The Dragons, the Giant, the Women, which I think will also end up at number 6, unless some of you can convince me that this is a bona fide work of nonfiction and that the author did not push creativity too far and did not take her work from nonfiction into fiction territory. As I said, this was my very first Booktube video, so thank you so much for watching up to this point. If you read any of these books, please let me know in the comments what you thought of them. And also, I would very much like to know if you feel like me that nonfiction books that try too hard to read like fiction sometimes leave the realm of nonfiction and become fiction. And tell me if you prefer nonfiction books that read like fiction or if you prefer nonfiction books that read like nonfiction. I am definitely in this latter type. So thank you again for watching and see you in the next video. Bye.